In this video, we'll teach you everything you need to know about basic airplane maneuvers. By the end of the video, you will understand the main cause of death in general aviation and why it occurs. There are 4 fundamental basic maneuvers that control the airplane. These are straight and level flight, turns, climbs, and descents. But in practice, they are all combined in every phase of the flight, and that's why in the end, flying is the composition of these basic maneuvers. Let's take an example. During takeoff, we find the combination of accelerating on the ground up to the moment of rotation, then moving on to a brief moment of straight and level flight, followed by a climb. This climb will include turns toward the first navigation point, where there will be more turns and straight and level flight. And during landing, the process will be the opposite, using a combination of descents and turns until reaching the ground. Airplanes are known to move in all directions in their operating environment. Keep in mind that these movements depend on flight conditions, such as if the airplane is level with the horizon. Moving the control stick forward will cause a loss of altitude, but if, on the contrary, the airplane is upside down, the same movement of the control stick will cause an increase in altitude. Everything is relative and depends on the aircraft's attitude. To explain these fundamental maneuvers and mention more complex details, it must first be made clear that the airplane has the ability to rotate on 3 axes. We have the longitudinal axis, the lateral axis, and the vertical axis. The flight controls will operate control surfaces that will generate a force and, therefore, a moment with respect to each of these axes. These moments will cause the airplane's key rotations. Next, let's discuss the flight controls. Old airplanes, such as military planes or more recently, civil airplane models like the Airbus, use a main control in the form of a stick. But also, as many of you probably know, there is the control shaped like horns. Regardless of the flight control's shape, its function remains the same, to operate manually using cables and pulleys or electronically. The main control surfaces. Besides the control column or stick, all airplanes have pedals and trim controls. Let's take it step by step. The control surfaces we can operate are the ailerons at the wingtips, which are activated by moving the flight control from left to right or vice versa, generating a movement called roll. The elevator, which is activated by moving the flight control in or out, will generate a movement called pitch. And finally, we have the rudder, which moves when you press the pedals with your feet and generates the movement known as yaw. To descend, the pilot moves the yoke, flight control forward or in another manner. He pushes it, causing the elevator to go down, increasing the force on the tail and generating a moment that pushes the plane's nose down. To raise the nose, the pilot would pull the yoke toward himself, doing the opposite, when the controls are moved to the right because you want to make a turn to the right. The right wing aileron would go up, which would decrease the lift on that part of the wing, and the left wing aileron would go down, generating more lift. This asymmetry in the lift forces on the wings would create a moment that would make it rotate. In banking, during turns, the movements of banking and pitching are actually combined, since when the aircraft rotates, the lift force component also turns. However, the aircraft's weight remains constant. To maintain altitude, a slight pitch is applied. This will increase the angle of attack and lift, maintaining the same vertical component. The lateral component makes the aircraft turn. To look left, the pilot would turn the controls to the left, doing the opposite. In other words, we turn the control in the direction we want to go, and push or pull it if we want to push the nose down or pull it up. But the case of yaw occurs because the rudder on the vertical stabilizer deflects, creating a force that makes the aircraft rotate. Well, here, in the same way, if you want to turn the nose of the plane to the left, you press the left pedal. Or if you want to turn the nose of the plane to the right, you press the right pedal. It's important to remember that roll and yaw movements are coupled. Whenever we do one, will cause the other. In this video, we'll explain that you can turn in a coordinated or uncoordinated way. This will depend on using the ailerons and rudder simultaneously. It's essential to note that all the previously mentioned maneuvers, including climbs, descents, and turns, are basic but still require significant practice to master. For example, in a descent, if we simply lower the nose of the plane without doing anything else, our speed will increase more than we want. When climbing or descending, it's necessary to control the plane's attitude and engine controls to slow it down. The opposite occurs when climbing. During turns, the effective lift decreases. That's why, if we want to make a turn while maintaining altitude and speed, it will definitely be necessary to increase engine power. Something that is very important is the elevator trim, or trim in English, a trim tab in small airplanes. It's a tab located at the end of the elevator, which helps us keep it in a neutral position. This tab is rigid and fixed with respect to the elevator, unlike the elevator itself with respect to the airplane, which does move. This tab moves with the trim control to help find the desired elevator position. For example, if we want the airplane to maintain a climb with a certain nose-up attitude so we don't have to constantly pull back on the flight control, we would move the trim to leave the elevator in that fixed position so we could climb without having to apply force ourselves. In the same way, when we want to fly straight and level, the goal is to level the airplane at a desired attitude so we don't lose or gain altitude. In slightly more complex airplanes, and even more so in larger airplanes, the trim tab is no longer just a small tab at the end of the elevator. Instead, the entire horizontal stabilizer moves completely when using the trim. In the end, it's the same idea, just a little more complex. So when we use the trim in these aircraft, we're changing the entire angle of attack of the horizontal stabilizer. We already saw this in our video about the Boeing 737 MAX. And this is done because it's actually much more efficient than the small tab that deflects. Having explained the fundamental maneuvers and how these are achieved using the flight controls, it's time to explain some risky situations that can become fatal and that pilots always have to be alert to, so that they don't happen, or if they do happen, they need to know how to get out of them. Pilot training heavily emphasizes recovering from these situations. We're talking about situations like stall entry, spin, or stall during a turn. As most of you watching this video already know, and if you don't, I have a video about it. Stall entry happens because the airplane isn't able to generate enough lift needed for a certain phase of flight and it starts to fall. Entering a stall doesn't mean the wing generates zero lift. What happens is that lift decreases and drag increases. Therefore, the airplane will be unable to sustain its flight speed. It slows down, causing lift to decrease further until suddenly the plane starts descending. It's commonly said among pilots that entering a stall is caused by low speed, mainly because of how this topic is taught and because of the cockpit instruments. This fact is often taken for granted, but it's wrong. Stall entry always depends on the angle of attack. What happens is that when we fly straight, we increase the angle of attack by reducing speed, which can sometimes be misleading. And the other reason for this misunderstanding is that, for convenience, there is no angle of attack indicator in the cockpit. And the pilot always flies by looking at the airspeed indicator and knows below which speed he can't fly to make sure he doesn't stall. What's interesting is that the stall entry speed is not unique. This depends on factors such as, for example, the bank angle. Here we can see how the stall speed increases according to the bank angle. This means that if we bank 40 degrees without flaps deployed, our stall speed will increase from 55 to 63 miles per hour. This is a crucial matter that is often overlooked, and its consequences will become apparent later. To clarify for anyone who may be unsure about it, the higher the stall speed, the worse it is. Because the stall speed is basically the speed at which your plane falls. So the lower this is, the slower your plane will be able to fly. In general aviation, the stalls pilots frequently train for differ from the challenging stalls encountered in real-life situations. A stall in training typically occurs at a high altitude with level wings, gradually reducing engine power until it happens smoothly. The plane stalls. In reality, if the plane stalls, conditions are very different from normal. It can easily happen that the stall occurs during a turn, and when this happens, it's called a spin or a spiral. We'll discuss that further later, but first, without elaborating too much, on an aerodynamic level, we need to explain the coupling between roll and yaw. This is because when we move an aileron, we create an asymmetry in the wing that causes one to move forward and the other backward, generating movement around the vertical axis. Yes, you understood correctly, it's called a yaw. Simply by applying aileron, the plane will also yaw automatically. There's also a video about this on the channel. If we don't try to correct this, two things can happen to maintain a proper position in a turn. To explain this, let's suppose we're making a turn and the circle we see is the path we're going to follow for that turn. If we keep the nose of the plane pointing in the direction of the path at every moment, effectively having the nose right over the path. When making a coordinated turn, if done incorrectly, the nose of the plane could point either inside or outside of the intended path. It's said that if the nose points inward, we're skidding, and if the nose points outward, we're slipping. And how does the pilot correct this properly? He uses an instrument called a turn coordinator, also known as a stick and ball. The pilot will try to keep the black ball we see in the center. This ball shows us which side we're uncoordinated to. The little airplane shows us which way we're banking or moving the wings. So, if we see the ball on the same side as the little airplane during a turn, we're skidding. However, if we see the ball on the opposite side, we're slipping. Returning to the main point, the pilot uses the pedals to control the rudder and achieve a coordinated turn, as indicated by the turn coordinator during the turn. Now we might ask ourselves why it's so important to fly in a coordinated manner. Well, there are several points to mention, but let's start with the simplest one to understand. If this is our flight direction, but we're flying the plane sideways, whether we're flying straight and level or in a turn, this will cost us much more in efficiency in terms of drag, parasite drag. What we want is for the plane to always be aligned in the best possible way with our flight direction. The other reason, which is much more important, is that if we fly in a turn in an uncoordinated way, we could end up killing ourselves. But pay attention, because not all ways of flying uncoordinated are equally dangerous. Flying uncoordinated increases the risk of stalling due to higher drag generation. This happens whether we skid or slip, but the important point to highlight is not stalling, which is already dangerous, obviously, but even more dangerous is the type of stall you can cause by slipping or skidding. Issues arise when flying the plane sideways, either by slipping or skidding. What we do is make parts of the fuselage get in the way of the airflow, which will then pass over the wing. If we slip, the lower wing is the one that gets the clean airflow, and the upper wing is the one that gets the dirty airflow. If we increase the angle of attack and reach a stall, the wing that will stall first is the one with the dirty airflow. As a result, the wing will drop, reducing the bank angle and significantly aiding in stall recovery. For this reason, slipping is used as a normal maneuver in flight. Slipping helps pilots lose altitude if they need to, always being very careful because a stall can be very close. For instance, if a pilot is too high during landing and it's safe, he can slip the plane to correct the landing path. Because if he simply lowered the nose, he would gain too much speed and wouldn't be able to land. This way, by slipping, you do lose altitude, but you don't gain speed, and that's what's important. What is really dangerous is skidding. When skidding, what we do is dirty the lower wing, therefore if we enter a stall, that wing would stall first. First, causing the plane to literally flip over completely and end up entering a spin, from which, at low altitude, it will be impossible to recover. The crazy thing about all this is the number of accidents in general aviation caused by this type of maneuver, done incorrectly. This is an example of a spiral in real life. In this case, it's forced by an instructor to teach the student how to get out of this situation. It's scary just to watch it.
Stable, look at the altitude, call out every 1,000, that's 0 now. I like 6,000. Keep the stick there, let go of it, see? It's not doing anything. 5,000, 4,000, come up to 4.5. Hands on dash, push, run, push, push, push. Okay, let it go. Now grab the stick and pull out of the dive.
Let's examine the following document by Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, a United States pilots association that conducts excellent aviation safety research. This analysis uses data from United States registered general aviation accidents between 2000 and 2015. Among all cases of fatal accidents, 53% are due to loss of control of the aircraft in flight. And of those cases, 81% were due to stall entry that ended in a spiral or spin. We're talking about the fact that out of the 240 fatal accidents in that 10-year period, 104 of them were simply due to spiral stalls. This indicates that 43% of general aviation accidents have been caused by this, an alarming statistic. We can compare these figures with this other document produced in the United Kingdom about general aviation safety. In it, we can find that 36% of accidents between 1980 and 2008 were caused by loss of control with a spin. With this data, we can safely say that more than a third of deaths in general aviation are due to this problem. The question to ask is why? The answer is simple and logical. A real stall outside of training will meet the following conditions. It will first happen during a phase of flight when we have low speed, such as during takeoff or landing. If the airplane is turning, the stall speed will increase. Failing to coordinate the turn could lead to a skid that results in a spin. Another crucial factor is the engine's torque during takeoff, which must also be considered. But there's an even worse situation than what was mentioned before. To explain it, let's quickly look at the parts or legs it can have. The typical landing pattern used for training or for approaches in general aviation. Basically, this is the way all airplanes will approach the runway. Usually, the runway forms one of the long sides of a rectangle. We'll orient the runway in this direction. We'll call this section here the crosswind leg, and this one here, which is opposite to the runway, the downwind leg. We'll call this section the base leg, and this last one the final leg. This landing pattern is usually flown at about 1,000 feet above the ground. Issues occur when using the runway in this direction with a strong wind blowing from here, causing several problems during the downwind leg. It will make us go faster and also bring us closer to the runway, which will change our typical base leg. Bringing us closer to the runway than usual, potentially causing the pilot to overshoot the runway during the base to final turn if they don't notice. If the pilot tries to land at all costs to avoid a go-around in this situation, what he'll do is increase the bank angle to the left, and since banking alone won't be enough, he'll instinctively press the left pedal to try to move the nose of the plane toward the runway, with the perfect formula to cause a skid and then create a spiral. By this point then, he will have lost control of the speed, which at that moment will be quite low, and he'll be seconds away from stalling, with a spiral at low altitude and no chance of recovering from it. As we can see in this article from Bot Method, 80% of accidents caused by spiral stalls happen below 1,000 feet. Given that recovering from a spiral requires an average altitude of 1,160 feet, it's clear why this type of accident is so fatal. This video aims to provide insight into the complexity of general aviation, a sector often overshadowed by military and commercial aviation in the public's perception of aeronautics. For those of you who are pilots, and I'm sure many of you watching this are, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about the training you've received as pilots? Please leave it down below in the comments so I can see what you think about the training you received. Do you think you should perform more complex maneuvers and practice stalls in more complicated circumstances? If this happens to you in the future, you'll know how to handle it, as it's a common occurrence. As we mentioned in the video, if you have a stall in real life, it won't be under the best circumstances. You likely wish you had practiced it earlier. Thanks for watching this video. Let me remind you that we have the Aerospace Podcast, where from time to time we do some podcasts about aeronautics. I'm leaving my social media, including my Twitch channel, which I recommend following, because we do live streams from time to time, and some of us from the community get together there. They're consistently quite entertaining. So yeah, see you in the next one.